بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا وحبيبنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Alhamdulillah, thank you for being here. How many are here for the first time? I've never been here before. Okay, awesome. Well, welcome. I'm very happy to have you all here. MashaAllah. You'll find that because we do these monthly, it's kind of like a revolving door, but I'm perfectly fine with that because that's the reason why I do it monthly. I know as women, we are usually juggling and all over the place, and there is the live stream option when you're not here. So feel free to come as you are whenever you can, but I'm happy to have you here tonight. We are reading from a text together called Purification of the Heart. So how many people have this book at home? Okay, awesome. How many people have actually read it? Okay. Sometimes I know I love books, so I collect them, and unfortunately I don't read all of them. I haven't read all of them yet. I pray that that's my retirement plan, that I'm going to finally read all the awesome books that I've been gifted or given. So alhamdulillah, this is a book that if you've read it before, then you know it's something that you can keep revisiting, to be honest, and you should, because the process of tazkiyah is something that we have to be tending to just the same way like you would a garden, right? You don't just, put the soil in, water the plants, and then just leave them to themselves. You have to go back and check on them and make sure they're okay, and is the sunlight good, is kind of adjustments right here and there. Similarly, we have to tend to our spiritual hearts in the same way, in that there's too many things in this dunya that can corrode the heart. So we have to constantly make sure it's okay, right? If you look at just the intensity of this dunya, all of the things that's going on globally with everything that's happened in the past 2.5 years, that aside, just with the trajectory of many of our lives, right? We enter different phases. So once you're out of the, like the Garden of Eden of childhood, and you suddenly emerge in this world, and you realize that it's a place that's heavy, right? There's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of stress. And I was just speaking to with the therapist the other day, and she was saying that stress is now one of the morbidities amongst youth. That it's that they could have a lot of things going on in their life, in terms of like having parents involved and financially stable homes, schooling, all of that could be fine, but they still have this immense problem of stress. And you'd think, what could they be stressing about? But it's such an intense time, and also by the nature of the dunya is a place that it's actually designed to do that to us. It's designed to make us very uncomfortable. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want us to be comfortable here, because this is not our final abode. So that's why we have problems, and that's why we have problematic people in our lives. And disruptions, routines are hard to sometimes maintain because life happens. But when you have something that kind of anchors you, which is why, alhamdulillah, we have to be so grateful for the blessing of Islam. When you really think about how chaotic things are, and then you see all these people who don't have faith, to me, I'm just like in a constant state of thank you, Allah, thank you, because I feel like we have life jackets on, like, right? We not only have life jackets, we have like ropes, we have like a tether, we have like a line that is still tethering us to something stable. And even if we're floating into the waters of dunya, that feeling of being safe, right, is really just such a gift. Because there are a lot of people who just simply don't have that. They don't have a family foundation. They don't have either a culture or a tradition or a faith that helps them make sense of all this craziness. So we really have to just take immense pause to say, Alhamdulillah ala ni'matil Islam. Thank you, Allah, for the gift of being Muslim. And just keep repeating that, even not necessarily verbalizing it, but internally, because that awareness of your state of gratitude will help you to keep priorities straight, and also when things get overwhelming, know what to do, which is, of course, turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We go to prayer when we're in those states. We turn to the Book of Allah. And then in our time where we can really have time for self-reflection, this is a book that we should have. So if you don't have it, I highly recommend getting it, because it's kind of like holding up a mirror to yourself. When you are looking at your own reflection, you can suddenly start to see things that you might not have noticed before because you were too distracted. All the fine lines and wrinkles, which we love to see, the spots, like yesterday was it? Yeah. It's amazing. Like, I had this little spot on my hand, and I have no idea how I got it. So it was troubling me all day yesterday. So I was like, how, what did this come from? This little circular round spot. And I'm pressing it, going, I don't really feel like it's tender. Did I accidentally bruise it? So I was like trying to figure out what happened to my hand that this happened. But in many ways, it's just, another sign of this life. Life happens. I might never know, but similarly, we experience these changes even, externally, internally. So this is giving us a mirror to our internal states. And so we're going to read today on the disease of the heart of hatred. And I want you to, as we read these pages, this is exercise that I have always done. I am very self-reflective, so I try to read with each word or each point with that's just personalizing it and trying to see where I am with respects to what it's being said. So try to do that. Don't think of other people, because it's natural to want to think like, oh, I know someone who's got this disease, But this is a time for us to think about ourselves. And so part of the healing process of tazkiyah is that you really are open to the idea that you're potentially full of diseases, and you're seeking to self-diagnose so that you can cleanse yourself. So don't let the ego distract you by thinking of other people, which is a very common tendency when we read books like this. So the way that the format is it's a book that's a translation of an Arabic classical poem. So there's verses that Shaykh Hamza has translated for us. There's just a couple verses, and then he gets into the commentary. So we'll read this, and then we'll pause. And if you feel at any point that you have something to contribute or a question, please feel free to jump in. I want this to be a dialogue between us, inshallah. So, hatred. Another disease is hatred for other than the sake of God, the exalted. Its cure is to pray for the one despised. This is with the understanding that you have not done wrong if you are repulsed by the hatred you harbor and do not act in accordance with it, which it would be to harm the other person. So these are, again, translations of the verses, and now the definition and further commentary on the treatment. So the next disease is hatred, or in Arabic, bughd. In itself, hatred is not necessarily negative. It is commendable to hate corruption, evil, disbelief, murder, lewdness, and anything else that God has exposed as despicable. The Prophet ﷺ never disliked the essence of anything, but only what something manifested. So hold a thought right now. Think of the things that you could categorize as something that you hate. Okay, not the people, okay, inshallah, but the things that you hate. And I want you to pay attention to your thoughts and what's the first thing that comes to mind. Anybody want to share? Injustice. Okay, so you hate injustice, like it fills you. Palestinian, mashallah. Takbir. All right, injustice. That's an excellent answer. Hating injustice. Anyone else? Yes. I see. You mean satanic verses? Yes, satanic verses. So we're making it clear we don't wish harm on the author of that text, but we hate the text. Very good. So yes, any disparaging of the Prophet ﷺ we should hate, right, with our full being. Yes. The smell of pork. Wow, I'm amazed that you can distinguish. Like, you mean bacon? Like, because that's the only pork that I would even. You know. Subhanallah. So the smell of pork. Yeah. Yeah. So you'll leave. Good to know. MashaAllah. Khatarajan, did you have your hand? Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you had your. Anyone else? Yes. You hate some of the political movements that are taking over our world at the moment. We all know how divisive these movements are. Yes, they're very strong. Fighting and argumentation, like when you see it between people and individuals. So it's just the idea of each other. Okay, mashallah? Yes? Dishonesty. So when someone betrays your trust, you hate that. Mashallah, very good. Yes? Sure. It's a very good. I think we can all collectively agree we hate nifaq, right? Hypocrisy. When someone presents one way but then is entirely a different, two-faced kind of an individual. I think everybody's on board with that. So when I think of this word, the first thing, and it's always been the case, I feel like, that comes to my mind is anything to do with the harming of children. I hate it, and I think if I were ever to lose complete sanity and do something violent, it would be upon someone who aggresses upon a child, especially in a really heinous way, any type of abuse at all. So that's just something that fills me up. So it's good to know, right? What does your mind or heart speak or think of as soon as you hear certain words and terms, right? So it's good to know that about ourselves. Hatred or strong dislike of a person for no legitimate reason is the disease of bughd. So now we're getting more specific, because as was mentioned, right, the Prophet ﷺ didn't dislike the essence of anything, but only what when something manifested, especially if it was hateful or that it was something that God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, also hated or condemned, right? In that case, we should. Anything that Allah hates, we should hate, right? Anything that the Prophet ﷺ hates, we should hate. But when it comes to individuals, there's a very clear distinction here that it has to be for no legitimate reason. So think about, again, have you ever harbored negative animus, rancor, hatred towards someone unprovoked, just because they rubbed you the wrong way, you didn't like the way they looked, right? Because some people can get very petty when they let their ego get the best of them. They can be very petty and start to think just these awful things about individuals, unbeknownst to them, completely innocent. That's where suspicion and a lot of other diseases emerge. But think, have I ever had feelings like that, like hatred, where I could really say, like, oh, I can't stand that individual? And it could be someone that not necessarily right? Think of celebrities, right? How many of us are like, oh, I don't want to see that person ever again? And I know there's a lot of celebrities that trigger people to have that, or politicians, right? That have certain lifestyle choices, yes, that we don't agree with, and you see them parading, pun intended, their lifestyle, right? Then it makes you feel, certain feelings towards them. And, that we can talk actually about that because, on an individual level, we have to think about, is that okay to hate an individual? We can, as they say, hate the sin, not the sinner, right? So the Prophet ﷺ once said to his companions, "Do you want to see a man of paradise?" A man then passed by, and the Prophet ﷺ said, "That man is one of the people of paradise." One of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ wanted to find out what it was about this man that earned him such a commendation from the Messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he decided to spend some time with this man and observe him closely. He noticed that this man did not perform the night prayer, the vigil, tahajjud, or do anything extraordinary. He appeared to be an average man of Medina. The companion finally told the man what the Prophet ﷺ had said about him and asked him if he did anything special. The man then replied, "The only thing that I can think of, other than what everybody else does, is that I make sure that I never sleep with any rancor in my heart towards another person." That was his secret. Okay? So rancor, again, is deep hatred. So he had the ability to, process and purge those negative feelings, and made sure that when he would retire to sleep, his heart was free of all of those feelings. So now I want you to, again, take it back to your own practical sort of application of this. When you're angry at someone, when you're upset with someone, whether it's a coworker or someone in the family, or maybe immediately in your family, right? Your spouse. Sometimes we can be very angry with the ones that are closest to us. Do you allow for yourself to go to sleep with all of those feelings in your heart? Or do you have a way of making sure that those things are, dealt with and that they're out and you've processed them, you've spoken about them, you've tried to reconcile? What is your process? Because I think it's important to think about, why did the Prophet ﷺ, of all the people, point this man out? What is he trying to communicate to us, right? He's telling us that this is a virtue, to deal with your anger and not let it corrupt your heart. And specifically the fact that he talks about letting it, ridding his heart, before he, every night, right? The fact that he does that, I think that's also another really important thing, and before he goes to sleep. Because what's the risk of not doing that? Exactly. That could be your last transaction with another creation of God. That, and some people, they have full on, like, it gets really ugly. So if you're cursing and really foul, and you're just so angry, and that's not to say that the source of why you're angry isn't legitimate. You could very well have a very legitimate grievance and a real serious problem that you're trying to communicate. But it's the fact that you let the anger consume you to such a degree that the very last words that you spoke were full of hatred and maybe even wishing harm, right? Because when people lose comportment completely, they can actually curse. And I'm not talking about cursing as in curse words. I'm talking about condemning people to hell, or even worse, wishing ill for them. And so that being your last transaction, that's a huge risk that none of us should take, right? How many of you have ever known someone who lost, their life during sleep, like didn't wake up, right? Right? One of my closest friends in her 30s, that's how she went. So it's very real, and age has nothing to do with it. If Allah wishes to take someone, He can take someone at any age. So these are the realities that we have to deal with, that we don't want these feelings to consume us to that point that it's our last, again, record. The angels are, the pens have lifted because we're now asleep. Yes? Mm-hmm.
Does rancor also, does it relate to holding a grudge as well? That's something that I think...
Yeah, not being able to forgive is a little different, right? Because rancor is when you really just have this hatred that there's no real like resolution to it. It's just sitting. It's a kind of like you're wallowing in this negative, or stewing in this negative emotion. Whereas when you have a grudge, like I said, it could be just that, there's lingering feelings. Maybe you haven't had closure. There could be a lot of different, factors that don't necessarily mean that you're just this person who refuses to let go of negative feelings, right? Because sometimes it's just like the opportunity. Maybe you're waiting for the other person to own up to their mistake, and then you'll be able to forgive them. And until they do that, you hold a grudge. But obviously, if you have, negative feelings that lead you to think really badly of someone and wish ill for them, then yes, you're kind of playing with fire there. So I think it depends on the situation. But this would be, a deep, deep feeling of hatred that's not really resolved, and maybe you don't even have any plans to do anything with it, but just feel those feelings.
So something similar, that was lingering feelings that over time turned into deep hatred for a family member.
Mm.
They were separated for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and she was waiting for things to get better, for forgiveness, and then there's just things happening back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
The last conversation I had with her was, I wish you would just die. Long and behold, he died.
Ya Allah.
Like literally less than, I would say less than a month from the time she made that comment.
A'udhu billah.
And she's very religious, very pious, will not miss a prayer, like very on point with most of her rituals. And now she's living with that regret.
Wow.
She says, all I can remember is good things from him.
Wow.
So suddenly, like the person that was the biggest problem in her life, that she made her worst enemy, is like, now that he's passed away, she got what she wanted. Now she's in complete regret, and all she talks about is how much she misses him and how much she can only think about good days.
I mean, that's a real cautionary tale for all of us to really think about. A'udhu billah. May Allah protect us from ever falling into something like that, where you could be so blinded by your anger and hatred that you would make a statement like that, wishing someone to die, and then it actually happening, because that's a vision. I mean, that's, how can you overcome that? The level of guilt and responsibility for something like that, I think, would consume any person, right? And then, this reminds me of the verse in the Quran where Allah says, perhaps you love a thing and it's, bad for you, or you hate a thing and it's actually good for you. And so the fact that now her only memories of this person are all positive, it's almost like another part of her tribulation, that she has to deal with the guilt of what she did, and on top of that, be reminded of every reason that she should not have ever made a statement like that. So may Allah forgive us. And I actually know similar situation of something like that happening, where such deep anger and hatred towards someone led someone to wish death upon another person, and that person died. So it's not something that, it happens, alhamdulillah.
So just to clarify,
Yes.
so like, if you're not wishing
Mhm.
anything bad on them, but
Mhm.
you just have like a series of unresolved,
Right.
not so happy, hate type of feelings,
Mhm.
is that considered by this definition a disease of the heart?
So again, it really depends on, as we remember the first line we read, there's no legitimate reason. So that means that there are legitimate reasons, right, to hate someone, like abusers, people who oppress you. So there are legitimate reasons where we would have these negative feelings towards a person, and if you've tried to deal with those feelings and they're still lingering and you're still kind of working on them, then that and it bothers you, right, as the poem verses said, then that's a sign that it's not a disease of the heart, right? Yeah, if you possess these feelings but you don't want to, like you have maybe someone again hurt you and you want to be able to forgive but you just aren't there yet, then you have to be gentle with yourself, because some people simply don't deserve that, and maybe that's why we have a day of judgment, because all the records are going to come out and everybody's going to have an opportunity to get the justice that they want or that they sought. And maybe it's Allah's the one who's waiting or not. He's going to give you that sense of justice that you seek on that day instead of in this life. So you're kind of still dealing with those emotions. But I think the point is here two things, right? That we don't have hatred for people without just reason or legitimate reason, and even if we harbor certain feelings, that we are uncomfortable with it. And I think if you're on a spiritual path, your goal ultimately should be to try to work towards forgiveness and moving past it. And I say this not because it's not about the other person, right? Sometimes when we think of forgiveness, we think like we have to do it for the other person, but it's actually not. It has nothing to do with them. It has to do with you. It's like you want to rise above and not, have these feelings that consume you, distract you, preoccupy you. And it's almost like dead weight that you're ready to just cut. And that's how you want to look at, like lingering hatred or just, whatever those feelings are. And they could be, again, for a number of reasons. But it's like I want to just let it all go, because I don't want to be bogged down by those feelings. So I'm doing this as a purification for myself, as a release from myself. And those words don't even have to ever be communicated with that other person, because as we mentioned, the cure for hatred is to make dua for the other person, right? That if you want to get rid of these types of feelings, whether it's for, again, someone who's harmed you or is continuing to harm you, it's to be empowered, right, with dua, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can remove those ill feelings by you taking the higher road. And again, not for their benefit, for your own benefit, right? Mm-hmm.
So to that point, one of the things that I read like probably 20 years ago that has always resonated with me is hate and grudge is a poison that you're creating inside your own body, hoping that it kills your enemy.
Exactly. That's a powerful quote, right? That hatred, rancor, all these feelings are kind of like consuming a poison, and you're harming yourself, but you are thinking that it's somehow going to affect the other person. And it's a human. I think we're it's something that make feel like you're empowered when you have those feelings, but ultimately you're the one being consumed by them, right? Yeah.
Can I share my struggle? Not with what you just said, but
Sure.
like before that. Because when you were like, hey, think of a situation where you have
Sure.
like harbored hatred, and I was like, oh, well, first it started off as a feeling, and I didn't like have any evidence to, and then there was actual like harm and stuff. But like the way I think of, I don't think of myself as an angry person, but I do think of myself as an often indignant person. Like, oh, that was unfair, and
Sure.
do that to me. So I think that the human side of me, not the spiritual side, says if I let that go completely, which I know I can, like the spiritual side of me can, I'm opening myself up
Mhm.
to them potentially harming me again.
Mm.
And so I think this fear of in the dunya being hurt by them again
Right.
is what makes me hold on to things that otherwise maybe I can very easily let go.
Sure.
And
And that's a very good point, because I think that leads us to think about boundaries, right? Um, when we've been hurt by people before, uh, in order again to protect ourselves from them ever impacting us again, what are the boundaries that we can create? Whether that means limited communication and just no access whatsoever. We have to kind of think about, how can I take the measures in my own hands so that this person never does whatever they did to me, before. And that's where we also can find some empowerment. But I think that's a that self-preservation kind of instinct is very natural for a lot of people, right? It's like, I need to hold on to this, because then what if they try to worm their way back into my life somehow, and I have a blind spot, and all of a sudden I'm back to square one. So I think that's a very understandable position. But I think where we're where we want to turn to is really kind of, as I say, letting go and letting God, right? Like Allah,
faith that Allah will
exactly, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to purge these feelings from our heart, and He's also going to protect us from this person's harm. And, being vigilant and taking all those precautions to make sure that they don't have access, all of that combined. And also with experience, we grow, right? When we're young, we're inexperienced, that's where we're vulnerable. But as we age and grow older, we get wiser, and we start reading people better, and our ability to kind of see harm coming is, I think, a little bit more acute. And then we're able to protect ourselves, and all of that is from Allah. So it's grace from Him. So I think finding the balance, each person is going to have to really explore their feelings. But ultimately, as I was saying, the reason why we look at this as a disease of the heart is because when it's without legitimate cause, and we're just sitting there feeling these negative feelings for someone, we have to see that as a reflection of our own diseases. That person is not doing anything that warrants this repulsion, but it's your ego, and it's really rooted in the ego. Because when the ego starts to think of itself as better than other people, right? That's when this sense of superiority will allow it to start to look at other people in this way, where it's like, I just look down on them, I don't like them, why do they do things like that? I can't stand, like I've heard, over my lifetime, oh, I can't stand her voice. And it's like, that's like, how can you blame someone for the way Allah created them, or their look? These are very petty, nafsi things, and this is what we're talking about. But like legitimate abuse, legitimate forms of oppression, harm that's come your way, you are permitted to work on your heart to get to a place of release and forgiveness at your own pace. And we turn to the Prophet's example as, when he, as we know from the seerah, his beloved uncle Hamza, during Uhud was mutilated and killed and slaughtered, and it was a full-on terrible, death that he, I mean, of course he's a shaheed, but in terms of what happened to his body, Hind, who was not a Muslim at that time, she later became Muslim, and her slave Wahshi, who she sent to do this, back then they used to mutilate the body, so that he actually took out his liver and then she bit into it. It's a pretty gruesome scene. But the Prophet ﷺ, even after they both converted to Islam, had a difficult time with them. Everyone else, it's like Sahaba, but with them there was a little bit of a distance, because he was reminded every time he looked at them, although he knew that Allah forgave them, they were jahil, they were in ignorance, it was not something that, so he's a human being. So we can take permission from that and say, I need time to process, and I also shouldn't force myself, when it's real serious cases. Yes?
I think you mentioned the nafs and superiority, right? But I think a lot of hatred comes from inferiority complex. So it comes from like
Yeah.
insecurity.
Absolutely.
There's a Muslim one I'm very close to, and she would hate certain types of people without any reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when I asked her sometimes, like, why, she's like, well, it's because they're prettier than me, and they're going to look down on me first. They're going to think I'm not pretty, so I'm going to hate them before they look down on me.
Wow. SubhanAllah. See, the way the human mind works, right? And you're absolutely right. Hatred can absolutely come from, I think, all forms of superiority are actually rooted in ignorance, but also tend to be rooted in inferiority when you get to the core, right? So that's a prime example. Disliking people for being more beautiful. And this is also where we get envy. So it's like a combination of different diseases of the heart. And it's unfortunate, but you have to look at, like, these are all symptoms of of societal diseases, right? That then affect us and infect us, spiritually speaking, because we live in a time where these things are so rampant. We are pitted against one another, especially as women, right? And then you're seeing, obviously, all these other forms of oppression that just, work to cause these types of negative feelings towards one another. So we are, in a way, victims of circumstance. But then that's why looking in front of in the mirror and forcing yourself to see your own pathology and, like, what is the root of this? Why do I really feel these things? Is how we uproot these diseases, right? But if we just kind of go along with them because they're what's normal, or nobody has ever pointed it out to us, right? So I'm glad that you were in communication with her, because you can then point it out to her. Maybe it never occurred to her that it's actually, really an inferiority of hers, and she needs to work on that, right? And maybe, inshallah, she'll come out of that, if not, if she hasn't already. But these are, again, the ways that we overcome these things is by paying attention to them. And that's why, going back to this text, it allows us to think about ourselves in a very introspective way. So the cure for hatred is straightforward, right? One should pray for the person toward whom he feels hatred, making specific supplications that mention this person by name, asking God to give this person good things in this life and the next. When one does this with sincerity, hearts mend. If one truly wants to purify his or her heart and root out disease, there must be total sincerity in carrying out the treatments and conviction that these cures are effective. Arguably, the disease of hatred is one of the most devastating forces in the world, but the force that is infinitely more powerful is love. Love is an attribute of God. Hate is not. A name of God mentioned in the Quran is Al-Wadud, the loving one. Hate is the absence of love, and only through love can hatred be removed from the heart. In a beautiful hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, "None of you has achieved faith until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself." The 13th century scholar Imam al-Nawawi comments on this hadith, and he says, when the Prophet ﷺ says brother, we should interpret this as universal brotherhood, which includes Muslims and non-Muslims. For one should desire for his brother non-Muslim that he enter into the state of submission with his Lord, and for his brother Muslim he should love him for the continuation of guidance and that he remain in submission. Because of this, it is considered highly recommended and divinely rewarding to pray for a non-Muslim's guidance. The word love here refers to a desire for good and for the benefit to come to others. This love is celestial or spiritual love, and not earthly or human love. For human nature causes people to desire harm to befall their enemies, and to discriminate against those who are unlike them in creed, color, or character. However, men must oppose their nature, pray for their brothers, and desire for others what they desire for themselves. Moreover, whenever a man does not desire good for his brother, envy is the root cause. Envy is a rejection of God's apportionment in this world. Thus, one is opposing how God meted out sustenance in accordance with his wisdom. Therefore, one must oppose his own ego's desires and seek treatment for this disease with the healing force of acceptance of the divine decree, and pray on behalf of one's enemies in a way that suppresses the ego, the nafs. So it really comes down to, back to this point that when we feel these deep feelings towards other people, there could be a myriad of reasons, but at the root of it, if it's, there might be other diseases as well. Like it could be that there's envy there, jealousy. It could be also that we are, unable to, again, get past superficial things that should not really be so meaningful to us. And, as was mentioned, that we're dealing with our own inferiorities and insecurities, and we're just projecting that onto other people. So all of these reasons go back to the root, which is the ego. And so I just want to make sure that it's clear, because this disease is specific to like having feelings without a just reason, right? Which is very different than everything we've been talking about, like when you've been harmed by people. So that's where you want to look inside and say, is there, maybe not an individual, but maybe is there a group? Because we live in a time, again, where of identity politics, right? So your group that you affiliate yourself with, if you have a group that you think is a threat to your group, maybe you feel something towards those people, right? And you have to kind of think back, like, is it fair to collectivize, demonize, right, all people? Like nowadays, one of the things that we're seeing, which is really difficult, is to navigate, because there's so many, it's such a political issue, is what's happening between men and women, right? Aren't we seeing that in our culture? I feel like there's so much now aggression between men and women, whether it's talking about relationships or, abilities and skills and just equality, whatever the conversation is, there's this, resentment that's coming from both, right? That's why we have the incels on one side, or red pill, as they call them, from the men's side. And then we have the super, really strong feminist-leaning, what are they called? Radical feminists, yeah, exactly. Radical feminists who really just despise men and speak about men as if they are the, core of every evil in the world. And so you have these two ideologies, in a way, just emerging. And a lot of our youth are picking up on these, right? They're talking points, and they're sometimes parroting them. On social media, you see a lot of this stuff. But it's also coming out, unfortunately, in our community spaces, right? Where when we talk about marriage, for example, I've now heard from many people that people are losing interest, right? On both sides. Like, men don't want to get married to women. Women don't want to get married to men. We now have so much distrust. It's like, let's be suspicious of each other. Where did all this come from, right? This is all Iblis. And Iblis knows that if he exploits our insecurities, right, that he can just cause these divisions. And this is divide and conquer, classic example, right? So let's just destroy what should be a complementary relationship, where we're uplifting each other, where we're upholding each other, and just look at everybody with this lens of distrust. And that's between the genders, and then you have between certain racial groups, right? We're on this rise now. There's a lot of race baiting happening, right, where everybody's kind of looking at people with different, prejudices. It's like we're going back in time. We worked so hard to get away from all of these prejudices and discrimination and all this stuff, and now we're going back, and people are becoming more and more separated, and you're seeing that. So how does this happen? It's because our natures are being exploited, right? And it goes down to the root cause, which is the nafs. We saw it even in the past 2.5 years with the vaccine debate, right? Did you see the amount of anger? Like, people were ready to just, cancel everybody, let them lose their jobs. I don't care. They're ready to, put people in internment camps if they weren't getting. It was just insane, the level of anger and hatred that all of these things, brought up.
California conversation.
Yeah.
In the rest of the world, it's like, oh, there's magnets and other things they're putting in,
Yeah.
they're tracking you.
Exactly.
Another weird conversation.
There were a lot of weird conversations, but I think if you were on social media, like, it was just so intense at times. And like, wow, how did we all start turning against each other? It's because our fears are being exploited, right? And so that's where, again, looking at our society and the current zeitgeist and everything that's going on, it's important to kind of pay attention to how, these things are being used as tools almost, right? Like what social engineering is, it's basically media is very good at this. Politicians, they know what they're doing. It's election season, so they want all of these crazy emotions to emerge, and they want to kind of play us. We're like pawns in their game. But we have to be better about knowing what does our Lord call us to, and that's where, addressing our biases, really paying attention to why we think certain things about people, whether, again, it's groups or individuals, and always being more critical of our own selves, right? Like, that's the way that the believer is thinking. They're not laying fault on other people, So even, for example, let's say, because I know now, unfortunately, these things are real, but let's say there is someone in your family who is known to be violent. Maybe they have a anger management problem, or maybe they are an alcoholic. I know, I can think of right now several examples of this, people that I know. And when they speak about these people, they actually hate them, because all they feel is that this person has destroyed so much. Addicts tend to, addiction spread, right? They usually take over the entire family system, right? And we have social workers here and other people in the field that know that it's not just something that affects the individual who's addicted, right? It's systemic, so everybody that is in that person's life tends to be touched by their addiction. So there are people who just can't deal with it, and they end up having such resentment and such animosity. And they are I know people who have literally wished death upon family members, because they're like, all they have done is ruined our lives, and they just do nothing good. There's no positive contribution. So they allow these feelings to kind of take over. And we have to be reminded again from a spiritual perspective, as we said in the beginning, that we're called to separate the sins of the individual and to see the disease for whatever it is. A lot of these things are learned, right? Violence is learned often. Children who grow up, it's cyclical sometimes, not in every case, but in many cases, violence can be cyclical. So if a person is raised in an environment where that's all they knew, then they likely, unless they have intervention or come out of that, they may repeat those cycles. So it's like, if you can find it within yourself to practice that empathy, to see that that person, may have had a complicated, life that I don't know about. And I saw like a really cool video earlier today, which I thought was, sometimes, mashallah, people come up with these really great ideas, but it was this young man, and there was no dialogue. He just had, like a script. But on the video, he holds up 2 lighters, right? And he's like, person 1, person 2, and they're both like, they have a flame. And then he takes one of the lighters and he puts it in a cup, and then he pours water. And each time he pours water, like a little blurb comes on the screen that's like, abuse, some other like problem, social problem, or problem that person suffered. And when he takes the lighter out, it doesn't work. And his point was like, you just don't know what in life has happened to people, trauma that has put out that spark, that that zest or that zeal, that flame in that individual, that makes them now whatever they are, whether they're harmful, whether they're just not really fun to be around. We just don't know. And sometimes that's, I think, where our deen reminds us, like, Allah is the ultimate judge, and you have to suspend judgment. So when you see yourself suddenly starting to feel these feelings towards other people, you have to talk to yourself and say, wait a second, I really don't know what that person's context is. I don't know why they are the way they are. I can sit here and be reactive to an incident I had with them, an exchange I had with them, and isolate them to that one moment in their time. Or I can be more empathic and say, maybe they just have a lot going on that I am not aware of, and it's not on me to judge them. I leave them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's how I think we can protect ourselves, right, from falling into these types of traps where shaitan will just, again, make us fixate on one thing, and we then let our senses go, right, which goes back to, what we talked about in previous sessions, like Imam al-Ghazali's real awesome breakdown of the human being. When you understand the human being as a triune, right, possessing 3 innate qualities, which is the intellect, the aql, the emotions, and then the appetites. What he does in using that framework is to say, what is leading you? Are you an intellectual? Are you someone who's trying to always rationalize things, right, and understand it in this way of like the grand picture, the bigger idea? Or do you let your emotions, your what he has symbols he has these analogies for each one. The emotions he uses a hunting dog, right? Because he's like, your emotions, you have to look at them like they have to serve you, right? And so a hunting dog has to be trained and it serves you. But if you don't train that hunting dog, just like if you don't control your emotions, it's like letting it loose, running amok. How is that helping you? And that's what we are in right now. We're in a world of emotions, right? We're in a world of people just feeling a lot of things, and everything's about feelings. It's like constantly people are triggered and angered, and it's like, at what point do you say, why am I so easily triggered? You know, why am I allowing people to constantly push my buttons? You know, how do they get access to my buttons? You know, and that's when you think back on, like, what can I do to prevent myself from being so reactive or activated all the time? So the emotions, you know, are leading a lot of people, or the appetites. So we're you know, as our teachers refer, we're in a world of a lot of dog people, and then the analogy he has for appetites is a pig, right? So it's like the world is rampant with dog people and pig people. So everybody's serving their appetites, eating, consuming, just constantly gluttonous in every which way. You know, that's where we're seeing a lot. Or they're just angry and reacting to everything without any rational thought, without any consideration of like the bigger picture or, you know, consequences or anything like that. And we, as Muslims, are called to rise to be the people of aql, right? Our deen is a deen of literacy. We're a deen that reads. Intelligence is important. But if we also forego our intellects and start to be just as angry or just as consumed with our appetites, we are no different than everyone else. And how do we stand out then, right? We're supposed to be leading the way. But unfortunately, we've adopted the same habits of just foregoing intellect, not factoring, like, you know, how is this impacting me? As we were told, right? When you hold resentment in your heart, you are the one that's bothered. That person is likely not even giving you another thought. Here you are, just foaming. Every time you think about them, you're driving, you're just like, ugh. How is that serving you, right? So that's why our attention is drawn to, these are not productive feelings. Let them go and know that there's a day of judgment, that God will give you justice. If you feel someone slighted you, someone's harmed you, someone's hurt you, then have tawakkul that none of that. I mean, that's why we have the hadith that say even the horned animal will be called, right, to speak about what it did to the animal that didn't have horns. Allah is constantly letting us know that nothing will be lost. Not an atom's weight of good or evil is lost. But we're not using our intellects when we want to take matters into our own hands, or when we're sitting with those feelings and not realizing that they're actually destructive to our soul, right? So that's what we're called to do, is rise. Yes?
I think also, Ustadha, is because when someone does something wrong, you want to see the revenge now.
Yep. Yep.
So it's like, I want to see it now.
Exactly.
In front of me. And it's like, you don't have, it's not in your hands,
Mm-hmm.
it's up to God.
So what's driving that impulse? When you want justice now, what is driving that impulse? The ego. But what is it? Is which part of us? Right? It's the nafs, and it's those emotions, right? Or the appetites. Like, I am entitled to justice. I want this right now. So it's not the aql, right?
What I've noticed is you will get justice even in this world.
Of course.
It's just a matter of time.
Exactly. And it's on Allah's time, right? That's the thing. Allah will distribute justice however He sees fit. And some people will get it in this life partially, but there's more to come. Some people may look like they've come out unscathed. And I've talked to people who've been really wronged, and when they look at the person who's wronged them, they have a very difficult time reconciling how did that person, they seem to have gotten away with it. And this is a real flaw in our thinking, and we should never entertain that idea. It's from Iblis, because if you believe in justice and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing escapes His knowledge, then you should not think that an individual, just because outwardly they look like they're unscathed or nothing is happening to them, that they are not going to be held accountable. Sometimes it's delayed. And in fact, that's actually much worse for them. So if you really want your justice, you're going to get it, because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tries a person in this life or gives them justice in this life, it's also an opportunity for mercy for them, right? Because any justice that we have in this life is far better than even a moment in the next life. Like, if your justice is delayed there, you're in trouble. That's why we have to recalibrate the way we look at problems, right? Because when we have problems in this world, you can sit there and again wallow and have a very, what we call like a worldly lens, right? Which is like, oh, this is such an inconvenience, why me, why me? And you're very myopic, you only see the problem. But if you have an otherworldly lens, a metaphysical lens, and you understand that, wait a second, so in the justice of God, sometimes, you know, He'll test us in this world to purify us from past sins and past deeds. Okay, so now I have a total redefinition of the tribulations that I'm going through, right? I can start to see things with a clearer lens and not react in a way that makes, you know, that may call into question whether or not I'm truly a believer, because we have to believe, like, you know, when we're always clamoring for justice, and we're willing to even, you know, push the boundaries, right? And we saw that, like, you know, during, I mean, just this past couple of years, when people are rioting and they do things, they're willing to push for justice to the point where they're themselves now the aggressors and causing harm. That's like, you've just lost the plot. Like, you're not even thinking at this point, because there's no justification for causing harm. You know, you can't say, I want revenge or I want justice so much that I'm going to go and blow up these people or do this or do that. We don't believe in that. That's taking matters into your own hands, and that comes from a place of insecurity, right? When you want to exact justice, it's because you likely think that there isn't going to be any other justice. But when you believe in a day of judgment, then you're like, okay, I'll just wait. You know, Allah is the best of planners. And to be honest, compared to your justice, what would be a better form of justice? Like, right, just think about it. You could cook up the best plot against whoever, but would it even compare to, you know, a fraction of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's justice would be? No. So it just doesn't make sense to go down that path. Yes?
I was having a personal issue, and I forgave two people, but then part of me, I guess that's my nafs, was like, you're weak.
Yep.
Because when I have other people come and talk to me about it, like, the hate rises up again.
Yeah.
And then so I decided just to distance myself from those
Good.
people. And just to be like, I was like, God, you know, you're going to get my right on those people. And I was like, I hope it's in this life for them, not the next one, because I don't want to face God and like have to deal with that in the next life.
I mean, and that's also speaking volumes about your faith and the goodness of your, because when you have a reason to want justice, but then you're also willing to be lenient with that, it's even raises your maqam even more with Allah. So it's a very beautiful position to be in, and that's a sign of inshallah, you know, guidance for you, that you are able to have that awareness that people who are trying to, you know, stir the pot and bring all those feelings in my heart are not good for me, because I want to move beyond this and I want to let go, right, and just let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take care of it. So this is where, again, you're using your intellect, mashallah, you're reading, and if we just start to pay attention to all the themes that we have in the Quran, for example, I mean, how many stories? Look at Sayyidina, you know, Yaqub and his, you know, Sayyidina Yusuf and his brothers. I mean, the betrayal of your own brothers plotting to kill you and then dump you in a well and let you go on, you know, and have this. I mean, he had so many trials along the way, but subhanallah, he realized that this is all because he had faith, that it's all from God, and he was able to forgive them. And they themselves were shocked, right, when he forgave them. But we have these stories to teach us lessons, that even dysfunctional families where things, I mean, none of us, I think, have ever had our siblings or people in our lives plot our death, right? So if we can see that it's possible to overcome, you know, something like that and extend forgiveness, then maybe we can let go of, you know, the rumors that someone started, or the lie that was told about you, or maybe they took some of your money, or whatever it is that causes these types of conflicts within family systems or within our relationships. So it really is about, again, you know, addressing you know, these feelings in your own heart and wanting to be like this man who can honestly say that, you know, whoever has done wrong to me, I just forgive them. And it's interesting because you see people, you know, I'm sure we've all received like those emails or text messages when loved ones are on their way to Umrah or Hajj, right? It's like, please forgive me if I've ever done any wrong to you. And we tend to like think of ourselves and realize when those opportunities arise the importance of purging these types of feelings and addressing these things. But on a day-to-day, we're fine with holding these feelings. And that's, I think, also something to think about. Why? What's the difference? Like, in either case, you know, I mean, it doesn't make a difference, right? If your heart is full of those emotions, it shouldn't matter whether or not you're traveling or whether or not you're home, because Allah is with you at all points of your day, right? Yes?
I just also want to add this perspective of sometimes like where we want justice but trying to forgive them because we don't know their ranking with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I know of a family member that they lived their life where they did some not so nice things throughout their life without
Yeah.
like talking about their sins, and they ended up dying in Hajj in a purified state.
Right.
And so here I know of all the long list of bad deeds they did, and within my eyes I saw Allah forgives who He wants to. So
Yeah.
we should try to forgive, right?
No, it's an excellent reminder, and I think something for all of us to think about is at the end of the day, we really, like you said, do not know who is who with Allah. And for us to, you know, wish harm for people who may have done their tawbah, who may be every night waking up, you know, asking God to forgive them for what they did to you. You know, you never know. Like, tears are real. People could be giving sadaqah. They could be like pleading and begging God every single day, but you're still holding on to these feelings, right? So you just have to be like, you know what? God ultimately will deal with it. I just got to get myself right, because we have very little time on this planet, and it's such a waste of time. I've seen people consumed with these kinds of emotions. They don't grow spiritually. They actually end up, because it's toxin, right? It's a toxin in your heart, but it actually starts to toxify other relationships, right? So when you let these kinds of feelings take over your heart, then you just shut down emotionally. You become a very negative person. People don't want to really be around you, so you start losing people in your life. Why? It's all Iblis. This is how he wants to destroy us. So, you know, it's just important to, again, assess where we are with respect to these diseases and make that decision, because this hadith is one of the most powerful hadith, that this man was not exceptional in other ways. Because sometimes we think that the standard is so high, you know, for me to be close to Allah or be a person of Jannah, I have to be doing so much in order to get there, which is good. It's a humbling thought. But it gives us all hope, right? That I may not be extraordinary in my practice. I may be kind of an average Muslim. But if I work on really ridding my heart of these types of negative feelings for people and seeing people with compassion and forgiveness and empathy and letting go of biases and not being judgmental, not being, you know, quick to like say things about people's choices. Like over the years, again, I've just seen where people were very quick to judge other people for their choices. All of these things are indicative of disease. Your ego needs a check, a reality check. Like, you are not any better than other people, and stop. You know, that's why one of the, again, foundational hadith is to mind your own business. You know, and when you start to grow spiritually, you'll find that becomes quite apparent to you. That I just don't have the time to deal with other people. I don't want to hear about their drama. I don't want to know anything about them. I don't want to think about them. I have to think about myself. Like, my soul, rectifying my soul and making sure I'm not a hypocrite, like we talked about, right? Nifaq, it's such a, that should consume us, to be honest. That one singular fear, am I a hypocrite, should consume us enough to not even give another person a second thought. Because we don't know. We simply don't know. We could be doing all these things, and then we come up on the Day of Judgment, and Allah's like, well, you know, your heart was actually, you know, trying to impress so-and-so, or you were trying to get this, or you're trying to get that, or there were all these ulterior motives, because we weren't paying attention, right? So that's why people of God are always consumed with themselves. Because it's like, I mean, we have hadith from Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Aisha, the people who were promised Jannah, who were literally speaking about themselves as though they were nothing. They had that humility, dhul, this way of looking at themselves, that they saw no relevance to their own existence. And they always questioned their own sincerity. I mean, you see hadith after hadith, the Sahaba would come and they would question their own sincerity to the Prophet ﷺ. So we, 2022, what business do we have judging other people, right? It's like, what? Wake up. You should be worried about yourself. And that's, all of us. So that's why, again, giving time to explore these diseases one by one, sitting with it, and really coming to the conclusion that I don't want to be afflicted with these things. I want just like, Allah, free me from these things that, prevent me from growing, and just teach me how. And, this hadith, I think, is one we can all learn from. So, alhamdulillah. Yes?
I was going to say, I think self-reflection really, really works.
Mhm.
Just sit down, get really in tune with yourself, and have conversation with Allah.
Absolutely.
It's so therapeutic.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
Tell me how you do it. Like, what's your process, if you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, no, I just take a few minutes when kids are all sleeping at nighttime. I normally read the Quran, or this is either early in the morning or late
Mashallah.
at night.
Very good.
I only read 1 page or 2 page, to be honest.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah.
amazing. It's beautiful.
I just do self-reflection. I just think about everything.
Good.
Even the people that wish me harm, I forgive them.
Good for you.
And that's when I feel really at peace.
Mashallah.
And I feel like I'm untouchable.
It's a
then
superpower.
Yes,
Yeah.
So,
Mashallah.
and then I just talk to God.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
You're doing exactly what we all need to be doing, right? Tadabbur is like reflecting, right, on the verses. And then muhasabah is self-reflection, right, where you sit and think about like your day-to-day or whatever thoughts. So these are all spiritual practices we all have to do every day.
It's very therapeutic, and it really, really works.
Mashallah.
For me,
Excellent.
it works.
Excellent. How many people do something like that, like some form of that? Yeah? At night or in the morning? It's good to pay attention, like, are you a night person? Does all your inner philosopher come out at night? Or are you philosophizing early in the morning when the birds are chirping? Right? It's good. This is a process of self-awareness, right? How many people are nighttime people? Like, right, you can't go to sleep, your mind is reeling with a lot of thoughts. That's actually good. I mean, the night is meant for, this type of work, of ibadah and worship and really reflection. The early morning too, but, and how many of you are morning? So you wake up on your drive to work, you're thinking about everything, huh? Mashallah, it's good.
Yeah, I think at nighttime your mind races, like, you think about your daily things. You just it's best to have a little corner for yourself, like meditate.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's my meditation.
I mean, this is prophetic, right? The Prophet ﷺ did khalwa. He went to the cave and he was sitting there doing what? He was doing exactly this, thinking about all these things deeply and trying to, call on God, because there was madness everywhere around him. And so we can find that khalwa in our homes, right? Mashallah, Dr. Rania does a really great job about talking about that, right? Like itikaf in the home, which is not just for Ramadan. You can have a place of itikaf where it's your corner, your place of spiritual rest, and wherever you find it, but it's your little nook that you create for that. And it's also very possible, because we're running around all the time, to do that internally too, right? So if you're ever, for example, I was speaking to someone earlier who, was having marriage issues, and she was saying that it's hard for her to always visit her in-laws because it's a difficult environment for her, which is understandable if there's hostile emotions, right? And so if you ever have to be in an environment like that with around people that you're just really uncomfortable, even it could be at your job or wherever, you can retreat inwardly, right? Which is what, the awliya and people of our, tradition have always taught. Like, just start thinking about Allah, and you can be sitting there smiling, right? But you're like, I'm in a different dimension. And there's a great story. Yeah, there's a great story about a scholar. I don't know what his name was, but he had a great reputation that he was this, wali. So another student of knowledge wanted to go meet him. So he looked all over the city for him, and he finds him in the marketplace. He's actually like a merchant, and he's selling produce. So he comes like, what? This is the guy everybody's been talking about and lauding as like this great spiritual master, and he's in a marketplace, because it's not always a good place. And so he was kind of shocked. So he goes up to him. He's like, I've been looking for you, and you're here in the marketplace. I thought you were going to, be this. And so the man just took him, and he brought his head to his chest. And the story goes that he heard with his own ear that he was doing dhikr of Allah. So he's, in this marketplace, but there's our karamat. Some of our great scholars had miracles like that. So he actually heard him. His internal state was in full remembrance of Allah. And Shaykh Hamza talks about that, like with his teachers. He said, Murabat al-Hajj, he would always be in dhikr, no matter what. And there were times where he would fall asleep, and the students around him would be memorizing their text or reading from the Quran, and he looked like he was asleep, because he was an older man. But he said he would answer them, correcting their mistakes. But he said his tongue was always doing dhikr of Allah. So there are people who outwardly may be doing one thing, but their internal state is with Allah. So we have to, we can take on those practices, but it does take some initiation to just start really like longing for that time. When you have alone time, and that's where our scholars also say that a good sign of who you are is what you do when you're alone. Like, what are you doing when nobody else on the planet is around you? There's no human being watching you. That's, you're just alone. What are you doing? That is an indication of your state, because we're pretentious when other people are around, but your true state emerges in those spaces.
Yeah, I just feel like, mashallah, with Islam, we have been taught from the get-go, right, to do zikr and to be grateful. And these are all habits that we were told to adopt so
Right.
many years ago when the West is now catching on.
Absolutely.
There's more and more like these apps on your phone, like Calm and Headspace and all these things. Like, that just seems to me like this is, modern times, like meditation. But I feel like Islam has been something that has brought this to
100%.
mankind.
I mean, even no, you're completely, spot on, because even concepts like mindfulness, right, which is a buzzword now. Everybody thinks that the West and their New Age, spirituality is so advanced, but we know from our tradition, like, again, look at all the great traditions have a practice of meditation. But the Prophet ﷺ, which, by the way, I mean, it's just kind of a plug, but Zaytuna this month, Rabi al-Awwal, is doing an entire series on the mindfulness messenger, the Prophet ﷺ, because he was the embodiment of mindfulness. And so, his every moment, he was mindful of God. And that's really what mindfulness is, right? When you're a mindful person, you are very aware of everything that's happening around you. So when he would speak to people, but he was just in a constant state of that hypervigilance that is mindfulness. And so you're right. But all these other concepts too, like intermittent fasting, we're seeing everybody's now adopting it. I was just saying, because I was doing a class earlier, about even like the miswak, the bidet, right? All of our sunnah practices, I'm just shocked. And for the Afghans and maybe even the Turks, we have the kisa, which is the I don't even know what kind of a fabric it is, but it basically exfoliates. I saw a commercial, I was cracking up. It was like, it's called something glove. And I was like, are you serious? You're going to take our kisa now and suddenly turn it into a new cool, find. But we've been ahead of the game with these respects. That's partly why, if you have ever followed some of my social media stuff, I try to highlight these similarities, not to center these types of things, but rather to say that we've all actually been ahead of it. Like even emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a new framework that everybody loves to hear about, but the entire 5-point list is all Islam. Every point: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, social skills. That's Islam. That's tarbiyah. That's from the beginning of you become a self-aware person. You study aqidah. You study all those things that mizaj, that tell you about yourself. Then you go into self-regulation, which is tazkiyah, which is what we're doing. This is how to control yourself. Motivation, we have the example of the Prophet ﷺ. We are constantly being motivated to follow him. Empathy, I mean, hello, was there a more empathic human on the planet? He empathized with everybody, animals, children, a tree. He's called the first tree hugger, and then social skills. He had all of these skills that nobody, I mean, now they're waking up to it. His ability to just, again, know how to deal with different groups according to their customs and culture, speak to people according to their, accents or different, language. But all of these things are now emerging. So I think we just have to have confidence in our tradition. It is haqq. So thank you for mentioning that.
Feels like a bit of an odd energy question given what we just talked about.
Sure.
But, your mention of meditation reminded me. I've been told by Muslims that like, why are you always on about meditation? We don't need to meditate.
Yeah.
What do you mean? The Prophet meditated. Yeah, he meditated, so you don't have to. So
That's odd.
yeah, I don't know how to respond to that, and it's I could very easily go through life not responding to that, but the problem is that this shows up at times when I'm really feeling connected with Allah, or like I'm a scuba diver, so like there was this one time when we were on the boat and everyone else was amazed at the underwater life they were seeing at the surface. We were going into a diving site, and my eyes were closed. I was feeling it at a different level. Like, I don't know how to describe
it. Was like a
but
spiritual experience.
Yeah, spiritual experience. I felt so connected with the creation, and people saw, I don't know if it was whales or dolphins, but they were really on and on about it, and like, oh, and she was sleeping through it. I'm like, I wasn't. And then there was a lot of kind of, I felt like I was being jarred and brought out of my experience to like listen to people's sensed experience, and that's one of the times. Many times it's happened like that. Wherever I feel like I'm having a connected moment,
that someone tries to get you out of it.
This is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do salah. You're supposed to, you know.
Yeah, no, you have to listen to that, you know, because we're all different. So unfortunately, I mean, human beings are always trying to force people to do things, but at the end of the day, you know, right, what connects you to the divine. So just let your heart, you know.